It was the moment Britain never expected to witness so soon. Inside the hushed walls of St. George's Chapel, on 10 August 2025, a tearful King Charles placed the sovereign's seal and ring of state into the hands of his son. The air was heavy with history, emotion, and finality. And with just a few solemn words, Charles did what no one thought possible. He made Prince William the nation's new king in all but coronation, the private ceremony that changed everything. It was the early afternoon of 10 August 2020 when the gates of St. George's Chapel, Windsor, were quietly locked. Outside, the sun filtered through the August haze, but inside the stone walls, the air was heavy with expectation. Only 14 chosen souls, family members, and senior courtiers were permitted to witness what palace insiders now call the quiet shift. King Charles stood near the altar, his hands resting on a velvet box containing two of the most symbolic objects in the monarchy's history. Even without television cameras or public fanfare, the gravity of the moment was undeniable. At precisely 2:15 p.m., the Archbishop of Canterbury stepped forward, holding a small, folded parchment. His voice echoed off the chapel's high vaults as he read a short but historic statement. William, by the sovereign's will, is confirmed successor in title and duty. It was a constitutional formality wrapped in centuries of tradition. Prince William, dressed in a tailored navy suit, kept his gaze fixed on his father. The only audible sound was the faint rustle of robes as the Archbishop stepped back, leaving father and son facing each other in silence. No television crews were allowed inside, an iron rule laid down by Charles himself. Instead, a single official court photographer stood discreetly near the choir stalls, her camera capturing the raw expressions of the moment. Charles's eyes were moist, his grip on the velvet box tightening as he finally extended it toward his son. The sovereign's seal and the ring of state, two objects that had passed through royal hands for nearly 90 years, were now William's to guard. It was more than a gesture. It was a transfer of active authority cloaked in ancient symbolism. By 4:00 p.m., the gathering was over. The attendees filed out through the side cloister, their footsteps softened by thick carpet runners laid to muffle sound. But silence could not keep the secret for long. Before the sun had set over Windsor's long walk, a senior courtier had already telephoned a trusted contact at the Times. Within hours, the whispers became headlines. Charles had given William the symbols of sovereign power. Britain was on the verge of a royal turning point, and the public had not even seen the moment happen. The quiet dignity of 10 August 2025 masked a deeper truth. This ceremony was not simply about timing or tradition. It was about necessity. For months, those closest to King Charles had watched his stamina waver. Public appearances were scaled back, and private audiences were cut short. The symbolic handover was the visible crest of an invisible tide, a tide driven by medical advice, personal grief, and the weight of a crown carried for only 3 years. What came next was shaped entirely by the king's health. Charles's health struggles behind the decision. By the time the calendar turned to May 2025, palace physicians had become increasingly concerned. They noted not only the obvious fatigue, but also recurring bouts of illness that interfered with state business. Even short meetings in the Clarence House study would leave Charles visibly drained. He was urged to dramatically cut back his schedule, avoiding all long-haul travel and limiting ceremonial duties to a bare minimum. The advice was blunt: either preserve his strength now or risk a total collapse before Christmas 2025. The first public signs of strain emerged earlier this year when Trooping the Colour, a fixture in the royal calendar, was quietly delegated to William. Rumors swirled again in June 2025, when Charles canceled 2 planned audiences with foreign dignitaries at the last minute. Those close to him whispered that it wasn't just physical exhaustion. It was the emotional toll of private family upheaval. In July 2025, the discreet but unmistakable exile of Queen Camilla from public life had left Charles subdued, his shoulders slightly bowed during appearances. Insiders recount a private moment in early August 2025 when Charles, leaning heavily on his desk, confided to a long-serving aide, "I want to see my son secure before my time comes." The words were neither dramatic nor self-pitying. They were practical, almost businesslike. The king had witnessed firsthand how sudden transitions could throw the monarchy into uncertainty. He would not leave such a burden for his son to face alone or unprepared. The decision was made. William would take on sovereign duties immediately, even if the law still named Charles as reigning monarch. It is crucial to note that this was not an abdication in the legal sense. The 1937 Act on Regency allows for the transfer of powers without a monarch stepping down entirely, and Charles's legal title remains intact. But for all practical purposes, the United Kingdom now has 2 kings, one in name, the other in action. And for Charles, this arrangement is less about clinging to a title and more about ensuring continuity. The health crisis forced the timetable, but the symbolism gave the move its enduring power. The passing of powers could have been done quietly, with paperwork and palace memos. Yet Charles chose to make it personal, to lace the act with the kind of symbolism the monarchy thrives on. The objects he handed over on 10th August 2025 were not just ceremonial. They were intimate artifacts of royal history, heavy with stories and precedent. And in adding one small handwritten note, the king turned a constitutional procedure into a deeply human moment that struck directly at his son's heart. The symbolism of the final gift. The sovereign seal has been part of the British monarchy's visual identity since the coronation of King George VI in 1937. Cast in gold and mounted on polished oak, it is the emblem that authorizes all state documents in the monarch's name. The fact that Charles chose to hand it to William in person and not via an aide spoke volumes about his intentions. Alongside it rested the Ring of State, a jewel-encrusted band last worn by Queen Elizabeth II during her final state opening of Parliament in 2022. Such a handover had precedent, though not in living memory. Historians point to 1910 when Edward VII, gravely ill, summoned George V to his bedside to symbolically prepare him for the crown. Charles, steeped in royal history, would have known the weight of such a parallel, but he added his own twist. A small ivory envelope tucked inside the velvet box. Within, in his familiar slanted handwriting, were the words, "Guard it as you would guard your mother's name." The inclusion of Princess Diana's memory turned the moment from formal to emotional. Witnesses in the chapel recall the instant William read the note. His eyes blinked rapidly, his jaw tightened, and his left hand briefly covered the paper as if shielding it from the world. Those who know him say Diana's name remains a touchstone, both a source of pride and a well of grief, even 28 years after her death in 1997. The seal and ring were symbols of a role. The note was a reminder of the standard by which to hold it. By entrusting both ancient regalia and a personal message, Charles merged 2 worlds, the constitutional and the intimate. This was not just about passing a crown-shaped burden. It was about passing a legacy bound by family, duty, and memory. For William, the weight of that velvet box was more than gold and jewels. It was his father's trust and his mother's name carried forward into a future that began the moment he accepted them. William's response to his father. The stillness inside St. George's Chapel on 10 August 2025, was broken only when Prince William spoke. His voice was low but steady as he told his father, "You've given me more than a crown. You've given me a standard to keep." The words were not rehearsed. They had the weight of a son speaking to a man who had carried the scandal and strain. For those present, the remarks seemed to close one chapter and open another. In that moment, William's mind was on two figures, Queen Elizabeth II, who had embodied the monarchy for 70 years, and Princess Diana, whose memory remained a guiding light. He promised to uphold the legacies of both, binding the past to the future in a single pledge. His tone, according to one courtier, was more soldier than prince. Firm, respectful, but without sentimentality. Yet his wife's silent presence added an unspoken tenderness to the exchange. Catherine, seated beside him in a deep blue dress, reached across and squeezed his hand. The gesture, brief and almost hidden, was noticed by more than one eyewitness, who described it as a moment of unspoken unity. To them, it was the physical proof that this would be a reign led not by one monarch, but by a united pair. That private assurance would soon be tested in the public arena, but within the chapel walls, it was a vow only they could understand. Before the gathering ended, William made one final promise to his father, that he would consult him on all major constitutional matters. He framed the new arrangement not as a replacement, but as a joint stewardship, a phrase that struck those present as unusual in royal circles. It hinted that this was less a handover and more a shared guardianship until Charles' final day. It was a balance between duty and deference, set from the very start. William's first words as the active head of state were personal and pointed, but it was Catherine's quiet presence that would soon take on new significance. Within hours of the ceremony, she was being prepared for a role she had long trained for, though never under such sudden circumstances. The palace had already decided she was more than a consort in waiting. By 11 August 2025, her status would be elevated both privately and publicly, placing her at the very center of the monarchy's future. Catherine's elevated role. The morning after the Windsor ceremony, Catherine was summoned to a private briefing at Clarence House. It was 9:00 a.m. on 11 August 2025, when she entered the green drawing room, where King Charles and two senior courtiers were waiting. Over the next hour, she was formally briefed on her new responsibilities as Queen Consort in waiting and constitutional guardian for the reign to come. These were not ceremonial titles. They carried the weight of real constitutional oversight, including the safeguarding of royal prerogatives during William's absences. At the close of the meeting, Charles presented Catherine with a sapphire brooch that had once belonged to Princess Diana. The jewel, a gift from the Saudi royal family in 1981, had been stored in the palace vaults for decades. Handing it to her, Charles made no grand speech, only a quiet remark that it should remain in the family for Princess Charlotte one day. Those present interpreted the act as a deep gesture of trust, linking Catherine directly to Diana's legacy. Almost immediately, palace communications shifted. In internal memos, Catherine was referred to as Her Majesty Designate, a term that had not been applied to anyone since the early months of 1952, when Elizabeth II had returned from Kenya as Queen in waiting. The change was not for public release, but word soon reached select journalists who hinted at the development in early news pieces. Social media reacted with a wave of praise for Catherine, applauding her composure through the past years of royal scandals. The timing of her elevation was deliberate. With William stepping into sovereign duties, the monarchy needed a stabilizing figure the public already trusted. Catherine fit the role seamlessly. Her reputation for discipline and quiet endurance meant she could carry the weight of expectation without stirring controversy. For Charles, ensuring Catherine's central role was as much about securing the monarchy's image as it was about preparing for the inevitable coronation to come. While William and Catherine's roles were being reshaped within palace walls, the rest of the family was also brought into the loop. Reactions varied, but one voice stood out for its steadfast support. Princess Anne. Another came from far away. Prince Harry, whose distance from royal life was underlined by the way he received the news. These responses, though private, would quickly shape public narratives about loyalty, unity, and the fractures that still lingered within the House of Windsor. Anne and Harry's reactions. When news of the 10th of August 2025 ceremony reached Princess Anne, she did not hesitate. In a private conversation with aides, she described it as the right step at the right time. As the most experienced working royal after Charles, she understood the urgency of preparing William for the crown. Her support was not only verbal. By 11 August 2025, she had agreed to personally guide William through the maze of ceremonial protocol until the formal coronation took place. In contrast, Prince Harry received the news through a private video call from California. The conversation, according to palace sources, was cordial but notably brief, lasting less than 10 minutes. Harry offered his congratulations, but also voiced concerns about increased media intrusion into William and Catherine's lives. While polite, the tone underscored the distance, both physical and emotional, between him and the core of the royal family. Anne's active role in the transition reinforced her image as the monarchy's anchor, while Harry's measured but remote response fueled comparisons between the siblings' dedication. Public discussions quickly drew a sharp line between Anne's hands-on loyalty and Harry's detached life abroad. For many observers, it became yet another example of how different branches of the family relate to the institution itself. Behind the scenes, the palace worked to present a united front. Even Harry's private letter to William, expressing both congratulations and caution, was quietly acknowledged as a positive gesture. Yet the contrast in visibility remained. As Anne stood at William's side in key meetings and rehearsals, Harry was thousands of miles away, his role confined to words on paper. It was a reminder that in the royal family, proximity often speaks louder than sentiment. The public reveal, by the morning of 11 August 2025, the speculation that had been brewing since the Windsor ceremony finally broke into the open. At 10:00 a.m., Buckingham Palace released an official communiqué declaring Prince William king in all but coronation. The carefully worded statement avoided the word abdication, instead using the constitutional phrasing, transfer of sovereign powers under regency provision. It was a phrase only lawyers and royal historians could fully decode, but its meaning was clear. Charles had stepped back, and William was now the acting sovereign. Crowds began gathering outside the palace gates within 30 minutes of the announcement. Union Jacks and Welsh flags fluttered above heads as chants of "William Catherine!" rose from the throng. By noon, television crews from the BBC, ITV, and Sky News were broadcasting live coverage, filling screens with shots of jubilant faces and waving flags. Comparisons to the ascension of Elizabeth II in 1952 filled the airwaves, though this transition, unlike hers, was deliberate and planned. On social media, the news spread like wildfire. Hashtags such as #KingWilliam and #HerMajesty designate trended within hours. Opinion polls moved almost instantly. An overnight YouGov survey released that evening showed 81% public approval for the decision, with even higher ratings among younger voters. The mood was not just acceptance, it was enthusiasm, a rare gift for a monarchy often accused of clinging to the past. Inside the palace, however, The tone remained controlled. William and Catherine were advised to keep public appearances minimal in the first 72 hours, allowing the news cycle to breathe and the public to absorb the change. It was a modern media strategy applied to an ancient institution, ensuring the shift in power would be seen as stable, thoughtful, and above all, confident. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelmingly positive, but the monarchy does not operate in isolation. Beyond the palace gates, the ripples reached Downing Street, the House of Commons, and capitals across the Commonwealth. In less than 24 hours, the constitutional reality in London would have to be acknowledged in Canberra, Ottawa, and beyond. The next test of this transition would not be in the streets or on television. It would be in the formal recognition by governments and leaders around the world. Parliament and Commonwealth response. When the Prime Minister rose to speak in the House of Commons at 2:00 p.m. on 11th August 2025, the tone was both respectful and forward-looking. He praised King Charles for his humility in service and welcomed William's leadership as a natural evolution for the monarchy. His statement lasted just 7 minutes, but it carried the weight of parliamentary acknowledgement that the transfer of powers was now the constitutional reality of the United Kingdom. The reaction from the Commonwealth Secretariat was swift. Within hours, an extraordinary session was called to formally recognize William and Catherine in their new capacities. Representatives from all 56 member states were invited to participate via secure video link. Key realms, such as Australia and Canada, pledged to send high-ranking delegations to the coronation once a date was set, signaling not just acknowledgement, but active support. At Lambeth Palace, the Archbishop of Canterbury confirmed his role in both the public coronation and a private family blessing. The announcement ensured that the religious legitimacy of the transition was as secure as the political one. For a monarchy rooted in both church and state, this dual assurance was essential. Political commentators noted the smoothness of the process compared to past royal crises. There were no disputes over legality, no visible factionalism within the family, and no delay in parliamentary or Commonwealth recognition. The structure of the monarchy had flexed without fracturing, an outcome that, in modern royal history, was far from guaranteed. Recognition from Parliament and the Commonwealth confirmed the transition on paper, but the monarchy's strength lies as much in emotion as in law. For Charles, stepping back from the throne he had only held since 2022 required more than legal documents. It required a farewell that the public could see, hear, and feel. That farewell came not in a grand hall or before a cheering crowd, but in the familiar setting of Windsor, where his voice would carry a father's blessing and a monarch's final words of authority. The emotional farewell from Charles. That evening, as the summer light faded over Windsor, King Charles appeared on television from the green drawing room at Windsor Castle. Wearing a simple dark suit, he began by thanking the nation for its patience through trials. Without naming her, he alluded to the upheaval caused by Queen Camilla's quiet withdrawal from public life in July 2025. His tone was calm, deliberate, and tinged with the fatigue of a man who had carried the crown for just over 3 years. Midway through the speech, Charles turned to the legacy of Princess Diana, saying, "Her light continues through her children and grandchildren." It was a rare and direct acknowledgement of her enduring influence. For many viewers, it was the emotional peak of the address. His words seemed to bridge decades of history, connecting the monarchy's most turbulent moments to the present day, with a simple truth about family and memory. He then offered his blessing to William and Catherine, calling them the future heart of this nation. He urged the public to give them the same loyalty and patience that had been extended to him. The camera lingered on his face as his eyes glistened. An unguarded moment that, within minutes, was clipped, shared, and replayed across every major news platform in Britain and abroad. By the time the address ended, Charles's message was clear. This was not a retreat in shame or defeat, but a deliberate step toward ensuring stability. His reign might be recorded in history as short, but it would be remembered as decisive in securing the monarchy's future. With Charles's farewell complete, the path was now clear for William and Catherine to step into the spotlight. The first days of their new roles would set the tone for everything that followed. They could have chosen a grand balcony appearance or a glittering state banquet, but instead, they selected something quieter, almost understated. In doing so, they signaled that this was not just a change of personnel, but a change of style, marking the beginning of a reign grounded in public service over pageantry. The first steps of the new reign. On the morning of 12 August 2025, William and Catherine made their first public appearance as King Designate and Queen Designate. Rather than heading to a palace reception or foreign capital, they visited a children's hospice in Oxford. The visit lasted 2 hours, during which they spoke with patients, families, and staff, shaking hands and listening intently. It was a symbolic choice, placing service to ordinary people ahead of ceremonial grandeur. During a brief address outside the hospice, William announced a people-first approach to the monarchy, including a review of ceremonial expenses. He pledged to scale back events that cost millions and redirect those funds to community projects. The statement drew immediate praise from newspapers and online commentators, with many calling it a bold and necessary step for a modern monarchy. Catherine, meanwhile, revealed plans to digitize portions of the royal archives, including Princess Diana's letters and speeches. The initiative would not only preserve them, but make them accessible to the public for the first time. For many, it was a deeply personal move that tied her own work to the legacy she had been entrusted to protect just 2 days earlier at Windsor. The shift in tone was noticed abroad as well. International outlets, from the New York Times to Le Monde, hailed it as the monarchy's rebirth in real time. Domestically, polling showed a surge in optimism about the institution's future. Whether by careful planning or instinct, William and Catherine's first steps had sent a clear message. The reign ahead would be built on visibility, transparency, and a renewed connection to the people they serve. As the world replayed those tear-streaked images, one truth became clear. This was more than a constitutional shift. It was a father's last gift to his son. The reign of Charles III may be remembered as brief, but it will forever be defined by this act of humility and love. And for King William, the weight of that velvet box will be more than gold or jewels. It will be the living legacy of a crown passed by choice.